This month, we've been looking at ideas that bring new meaning to living from a place of power, a place of true power, by taking the word power and making it into an acronym. That was easy for me to say, right? POWER, to look at the qualities that, when combined, support us in living from that place. So far we have looked at P for expressing our passion and purpose, O for coming from a place of oneness, W for holy worthiness, WH, then H. Today we are going to explore the E for evolution and walk the evolutionary road hand in hand and side by side. Has anyone ever gotten onto a roller coaster and had a big case of the excited scareds? You know what I mean, right? It's when you've been standing in the line for hours or like a lot of minutes, anticipating the ride, but now that you're actually seated, there's a little party that wonders if this was such a good idea after all, right? And you're so full of those excited scareds that you reached out and took the hand of the person sitting next to you like, we got this, right? Or a better one. How many of you have accidentally grabbed the hand of the person next to you right when Jack Nicholson's axe blade comes through the door? You know what I'm talking about, right? And what's his iconic next line? Here's Johnny. That's right. So, you need those moments, right? Sometimes you need to hold on to someone's hand. So sometimes we need to do the same thing when we take a leap into the evolution in our lives that's about to take place. We need to grab onto someone else for a bit of support because the change that evolution brings can be scary. Now, if you recall from Tony's readings, the Bible passage from Isaiah 43, verses 18 and 19 helped inspire this talk. It says, "Remember not the former things, nor consider the things of old, because behold, I'm doing a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert." I'll make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. No matter what you're facing, you will be taken care of. So bearing that in mind, I want to set the tone for our morning with this quote from Andrew Cohen in his book, Evolutionary Enlightenment. On page 204, he wrote, "When we're talking about pushing out our edge," and isn't that what we've really been exploring the last couple of months? Pushing out for our boundaries, right? So when we're talking about pushing out our edge, there's always going to be an element of enormous risk. Evolution is a messy process. There are no guarantees. If you want to evolve, you must have the spiritual self-confidence, heroic will, tenacity, courage, and commitment to fearlessly engage with the evolutionary process until something profound, mysterious, and extraordinary happens that cannot be undone. When you're living this fully and fearlessly in the evolutionary passion and perspective of the authentic self, then something extraordinary does begin to happen. The unmanifest potential of the near future flickers into awareness, and even in brief moments seems to actually become manifest in the present moment. And when we meet others in the same heightened state of consciousness, look around, there they are. So when we meet others in this same heightened state of consciousness, together we can see and feel, directly cognize and intuit a compelling future that is possible to create here and now in the present moment, not as a remote ideal, but as the most screamingly imminent potential imaginable, finding each other. Finding those other individuals who feel as passionately as we do about the evolution of consciousness and culture liberates and uplifts our spirits and gives us the inspiration to take bold steps we otherwise might not have the courage to take. So we need somebody along with us on the ride if we're going to make the big steps. And my friends, this morning we are going to take a bold step together. Although our talk today isn't as emotionally evocative as the last time I was up here, if you don't know what I'm talking about, my sermon the second week of the month is up on our website, santanitachurch.org, under the Ministries tab, and you'll get to hear me cry, which is never pretty. But if you want to listen to it and get an idea of what I'm talking about, go check it out. But although this isn't emotional like the last one, it's full of all kinds of really important stuff. So kind of hang with me here. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin said, there is almost a sensual longing for communion with others who have a large vision. The immense fulfillment of the friendship between those engaged in furthering the evolution of consciousness has a quality impossible to describe. At every given moment of our individual and collective lives, we are in an evolutionary growth cycle. That means that no matter how great our lives have become, no matter how available we are to the great law of life, we are still evolving. And there has been a consistent message. Change is coming. Do not be afraid of it. Embrace it. It will lead you to something wonderful. Allow Spirit to surprise. Live in the unknown. Change is good, healthy, and will make us stronger, both individually and as a community, both locally and globally. You may be asking, what do you mean about a community? What's going to happen? Well, that's a good question. And the most honest answer I can give you is, I don't know what's going to happen, but I know it's going to be a fun ride. And I know I've had this conversation with several of you, whether I brought it up or you did, but for those of you who've been here for a while, have you noticed a change in the feeling here? I know that for some of us, there's been an undercurrent of excitement floating around. I don't think any of us knows why it feels that way, but it does, right? Things have just begun to feel more alive somehow. The enormity of our collective change really became clear for me during karaoke night last Friday. And no, it's not a plug. Okay, although I would love to have you, that is not a plug for karaoke night. There is a purpose here. So there we were, a room full of people, many of us only vaguely acquainted, even a couple of strangers to some of us, and everyone was embraced. Everyone was brought into the fold. We had group sings and everything. Even the new folks got up and sang. It was so cool because everyone was supported and celebrated. It was as though we kind of organically became a family. And I know that sounds cheesy. I really do. I do lean toward the cheese in most things I do. I know that as well. But everyone was cheered on. Everyone jumped in. Everyone had fun together. And when I took a mental step back to take in the whole picture, I was kind of blown away. I've been doing karaoke since the US stole it from Japan and brought it over. So it's really significant when I say that our little gathering the other night was honestly the most fun I've had doing it. I mean, the support was incredible. So yeah, we're evolving and we're changing as a community. And I have at least a vague idea of the direction we're headed in. But in the last several months, I've had the feeling like we're building momentum towards something. I'm getting some nods. So I know some of you feel that too. But what may have been missed in my description of the community picture is that had we as individuals not evolved and changed, that collective shift could not have happened. And here's the exciting part. We have shifted to this unified family so perfectly and effortlessly that we are primed to embrace others just as easily and seamlessly. Now we just have to help them find us, but that's a sermon for a different day. As I was writing this, I was reminded of a quote by Anais Nin. And the day came when the risk to remain tight in a bud was more painful than the risk it took to bloom. We're afraid of risk, aren't we? And why? Why exactly? What are we afraid of? That's the big one. But Spirit's always telling us, worry. Why? Do you really think something could go wrong? Have you forgotten how much you're loved? Don't you see how far you've already come? Could you possibly be in better hands? So when it comes to change, that natural bending growth we're supposed to experience throughout our human experience here, why do we resist so forcefully? Why do we avoid change when every experience we've ever faced has taught us that although change can be painful, sometimes seemingly overwhelmingly so, the pain eventually subsides and we emerge from the experience changed, almost always for the better. And I've got to add here that although it may not appear that we are changed for the better sometimes, that's why I put the almost, if we hang in there a while and we take a look back when we're a little further along, we will see that we are better. every single time. It can just take a little while to get that perspective. I have not had a single experience which defies that. Andrew Cohen writes, the degree to which we avoid and deny is the degree to which the inner wall that is ego will continue to strengthen. If we are in the habit of constant avoidance, ego becomes hard and impermeable. And every time we choose to avoid something, that wall gets reinforced. Avoidance literally creates ego, and the ego's ability to reinforce its own walls is quite extraordinary. It's not a game. Some human beings will go so far as to damage their own souls because they don't want to face themselves. But the moment we stop avoiding those walls, remember we talked about those walls we've built inside ourselves earlier this month. Those walls begin to crumble when we stop avoiding. A little further along, Cohen suggests that this signifies a tipping point in the path and practice of evolutionary enlightenment, an inner threshold which, once you step past it, even just a little bit, it changes everything. It points to that moment in our own evolution when we begin to care more about the process as a whole than we care about our own egos, fears, desires, and concerns. Now, before we go on, let's briefly talk about ego. And I'm going to keep this super, super basic. So if there are psychologists in the room, don't come for me. These are the broad strokes, okay? In Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytic theory, we have the id, ego, and superego. The id is that primal and instinctual part of the mind, the part of the psyche which responds directly and immediately to basic urges, needs, and desires. And it's essential to the survival of the human body, of the vessel. The ego is the only part of the conscious personality. It's what the person is aware of when they think about themselves and is what they usually try to project toward others. So in its most basic form, the ego is what translates the primal urges of the id into socially acceptable, realistic strategy, or what we need in relation to what we think about ourselves and what we want others to think about us. It's the I, me, mine. Okay? And for our purposes today, we're just going to quickly touch on the superego bit by saying that it's a part of the unconscious mind. That is the voice of conscience doing what is right or wrong. And it's the source of self-criticism. That's a biggie, right? We all know how awful that self-criticism can make us feel sometimes, right? So in Living Without Fear, on page 39, Ernest Holmes writes, there is an inner urge in our own minds to grow, to expand, to break down the barriers of previous limitations and to ever widen our experience. This persistent urge is a divine influence, an irresistible force, and constitutes the greatest impulse in human experience. Mostly misinterpreted and misunderstood, and often pursuing devious pathways, it is still the urge back of all accomplishment, the promise of all fulfillment. I had an interesting conversation after the Day of Peace service on Wednesday with a longtime member who's been away for a while. We started talking about books. We were in the bookstore, of course. I call it my office. It's where I go when I'm not in here or in that office. So we started with books, and then that quickly led to the subject of belief, which even more quickly led to matters of enlightenment. And toward the end of our conversation, he mentioned this article that I might find interesting. And as he went on to describe his travels and many years of shamanic study, he had said something along the lines of having trouble staying connected, staying being the operative, staying connected with divine consciousness because his hard drive, that physical, fact-based human brain, gets in the way. And I said, it's not the brain, it's the ego. You're still thinking of yourself as I, me, instead of we. And so here we are. I should point out that I hadn't even cracked the binding on the book that I've been referencing up here. So it was really surprising when I learned about the ego versus spiritual evolution the next day. Now, this member did not know at the time where my talk was going this week. And as he's done before, we are going on like the third or fourth significantly synchronous sermon development. That was a lot of S's. Significantly synchronous sermon development for quite a while now. Third or fourth time, I think, easily. Our talk and later the article he sent me spoke almost exactly to what I'd planned on doing this week. And here I thought I was writing this thing, right? Just another bit of proof about our spiritual connectedness, right? And yes, it is not lost on me that it was my own ego which caused me to believe that I was putting this sermon together, right? But I digress. Anyway, the article he sent me is from wakeupworld.com, and it's called 11 Sneaky Spiritual Traps Sabotaging Your Growth. And it's by Alethea Luna. And it opened with, as we progressively advance on our spiritual awakening paths, our soul essence begins to blossom like a luminous flower deep in our hearts. The more we clear away the dead, gnarled, and overgrown beliefs, perspectives, and emotional baggage within us, the more clearly we feel our divine essence or true nature. However, like any garden, our metaphorical inner landscapes can be consumed by weeds, pests, and forms of pollution that strangle anything beautiful we've been nurturing. And there it is again. You've got to not only allow, but embrace and maybe invite change. And here's the crux of it. Another quote, this time from Adyashanti in The End of Your World, and thank you for recommending that book to me. It's on its way. The quote is, this isn't a journey about becoming something. This is about unbecoming who we are not. Unbecoming who we are not. So stripping away all that is not part of our divine birthright. All of the things that we hold on to, all of the bits and pieces of the us we've so carefully crafted to present to the world for whatever reason, that image we've worked so hard to create. Allow it to be transient, or at least malleable. Allow change to reshape it into something which serves the you may have kept hidden inside for so long that you've forgotten it was there. Beginning on page 162, Cohen says that consistent, meaningful, and demonstrable transformation only occurs when the individual's awakening to the authentic self crosses the threshold from 50 to 51%. Just that little bit. Otherwise, you can experience an awakening to higher potentials and taste the thrill of the evolutionary. Too many syllables. Taste the thrill of the evolutionary impulse stirring within. But as long as the motives of the ego remain stronger within you, sooner or later the clarity and conviction and inspiration you find will be hijacked by your ego. If that's where your identity is still rooted. Doesn't that echo the quote from Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, Tony read? No matter what the practice or teaching, ego loves to wait in ambush to appropriate the spirituality for its own survival and gain. Cohen goes on to say that crossing the 51% threshold is not the end of the path. It's just the beginning. As you take that step, the ego doesn't just disappear. Doesn't just lie down quietly. It continues to represent as much as 49% of your self-sense. And then you still have a long way to go. But because the balance of power within yourself has tipped from the ego to the authentic self, you begin to experience a tremendous sense of obligation. I know it's a rough word, but wait for it. Holy obligation, or what we might call evolutionary tension. You realize that you simply cannot continue to live for your own sake alone. Indeed, you awaken to the moral imperative to ensure that the process evolves through you. In this new enlightenment, ego is transcended not through the traditional way of awakening in mystical revelation to the fact of your personal insignificance, but rather through a realization of your cosmic significance. The solution to exaggerated self-importance is not to feel less important, but to discover and take responsibility for just how important you really are. There is no greater challenge to narcissism than awakening to cosmic consciousness, to the fact that the evolution of the interior cosmos is depending on you. We all have divinity to step into. The question is, are we ready to take that journey? And if we're not, then what are we afraid of? What's stopping us? Nancy nailed it when she said failure. But what is failure really? If you look at the dictionary, it says failure is a condition or fact of not achieving the desired end or result. And I really like that the dictionary uses the words condition and fact because they have tremendous metaphysical significance. We know as metaphysicians that conditions and facts have nothing to do with the truth, with a capital T, right? In The Science of Mind on pages 302 and 303, Ernest Holmes says, if we appear to have failed, we should realize that there are no failures in the universe. We should completely erase the idea of failure by stating that there are no failures. If we believe we failed last year, we will be likely to fail again this year unless that false thought is erased. Break down everything except the recognition of the one perfect power, which is not contingent upon any place, person, condition, time of year, or anything but itself. That sounds an awful lot like that quote from Adyashanti, right? This isn't a journey about becoming something. This is about unbecoming who we are not. I've been chewing on that since Wednesday. It's been going. There's this quote from the end of the remake of The Day the Earth Stood Still that seems really appropriate for us today. It was, it is only on the brink that people find the will to change. Only at the precipice do we evolve. This is our moment. Don't take it from us. We are close to an answer. This is our moment. Yours and mine individually, and for our ever-evolving Santa Anita Church community, us in this room, and for us in the grand scheme of life in the world. And as Andrew Cohen said, if we want to evolve, we must have the spiritual self-confidence, heroic will, tenacity, courage, and commitment to fearlessly engage with the evolutionary process until something profound, mysterious, and extraordinary happens that cannot be undone. It is said that when baby birds reach a certain size, their mother begins to line the nest with uncomfortable stuff, like sharp sticks and thorns. This is a gentle way of encouraging the baby birds to take to the sky on their own. Do you believe that there's a divine intelligence within you that knows how to sustain your next step of growth? The evolution of your own being. If you do, it's time to come to the edge. Guillaume Apollinaire wrote, "Come to the edge," he said. "We can't. We're afraid," they said. "Come to the edge," he said. "We can't. We're afraid," they said. "Come to the edge," he said. And they came, he pushed, and they flew. So let me remind you that in all the places the nest of your life starts getting uncomfortable, change is coming. Do not be afraid of it. Embrace it. It will lead you to something wonderful. Thank you.